Hey guys, welcome to The Disruptors, the show where we get the folks who are changing the way we think about, well, everything. Today we got one of them, Douglas Rushkoff, on the program. Thanks for coming today, Douglas.
Thanks for having me.
By the way, do you like Doug or Douglas?
Whatever there's time for. I mean, I feel like Douglas is more me. I'm like a Douglas. I'm not a Doug. A Doug is like, I don't know, sounds like a golfer or something.
That's okay. I am certainly not a golfer, so we'll go with
Yeah.
Douglas.
But if there's an emergency, if there's like a brick that's about to fall on my head, you could say Doug so that you have time to say the other stuff.
Yeah, we'll just go with yo. We'll go with yo. Something
Okay.
short, quick, and ready to rock.
Okay,
So
good.
speaking of which, I want to jump right into this. And my first question, the most important thing: New Zealand or Alaska? I heard you talking about it before, so let's jump straight to that.
Well, it depends on your goals. I mean, I'm not really as good an expert in climate change as I should be to know how to advise billionaires on where to build their shelters. If I were going to go somewhere today, I'd certainly rather move to New Zealand than Alaska. There's like friendly people there. There's no natural predators. It's a sweet place. But yeah, I mean, it's funny when any of us, particularly if you watch zombie TV shows, it's easy to get into that frame of mind where you start to do almost game theory analysis of each choice. It's almost like a weird consumer choice. It's like, do I get the electric car or the gas car? Do I get the oil furnace or a steam system? Do I build my shelter in New Zealand or in Alaska, depending on what's going to melt when?
Yeah, it's like, do I eat Fido now, or do I try to bring him with me because I need a companion? It's a messed up thing to think about, but I like that you talk about that, and that's something that you get into. Not specifically that this is something you want to talk about, but more what the hell is happening with society where people are having these backroom conversations.
Yeah, I mean, the strange thing is, I guess they look at, if they get a smart person in the room, they are still thinking of us as being able to help them position themselves for the inevitable future, rather than that we could actually help them create the future that they want to see. When I think back even to, the evil corporations of yesteryear, when you look at, say, General Motors, when they looked at America and said, look, there's no roads, there's no appetite for cars. People are perfectly happy getting on a streetcar to go home at night. We're going to have to really screw this place up. We're going to have to turn things around. So, all right, let's get our CEO installed as the Secretary of Defense and create a justification that we need to be able to move the military around the country. So that's why we're going to get roads. Let's get in with the urban planners and create suburbs that are going to require people to use automobiles to get from home to work. Let's buy the streetcar company so that we can decommission them and then make cars necessary. I mean, when not that it was a positive vision, but they looked at the future as something that they could have an impact on, that we can change the world to accommodate what we want. And the folks that I'm meeting and speaking with today, these billionaires, don't look at the future that way. They really think, unimaginably about it. Can I get a spaceship to get away from it? Can I get a shelter to get under it? Can I have robots to protect me from the mobs? As if the future is set in stone, that the disaster is coming no matter what, and I have to just insulate myself from it.
And you see the dichotomy because you have that with certain billionaires, at least off the record. But then you also have the flip side of, we essentially have Bezos and Musk in a pissing contest to see who can get to space first and who can make a bigger impact on the world. You see guys like Bill Gates saying, screw it, what the hell is all this money for? We might as well try to save the world somehow. What is the direction you see us headed? Do you see that as a positive or a negative, this extreme wealth, and then certain individuals making certain decisions around it?
Well, I mean, I see it as a negative. The irony here is that people think, oh, if this guy's got $5 billion, so he could just spend it in such a way as to fix the world's problems. And it almost as if it's almost as if obliterating the money itself would do more good than trying to spend it. It's like, or worse, trying to save it. The LA Times did a piece, gosh, it must have been a decade ago, about the Gates Foundation, and it looked at the impact of the capital itself, just the way the capital is sitting there invested in the S&P index funds, and what they're trying to do with the capital. And it was as if the damage that was being done just by investing this money was greater than the good that they were doing with the interest on the money by deploying it. And the other problem is these billionaires disconnected from the on-the-ground reality end up coming up with solutions that don't really solve problems. They look great on paper, like, let's give all of these African villagers insecticide-treated mosquito nets so that they won't get malaria at night. They put it over their beds. Only these people were poor, and they saw the netting, and they said, we're going to use these to catch fish so we don't starve. And they ended up polluting their streams with the insecticide that was on these nets. So you end up with these real, unintended consequences when you go in almost Sim City style and try to, rebuild civilization from the ground up using the money that you extracted from it, that you destroyed the civilization in the first place.
But isn't that a dead argument then? How do you go forward if the only thing you can see is the past?
Well, the way to go forward is, instead of trying to extract all this money and then shove it back in there in the ways that you think, you should create business plans that don't require this scorched earth extraction to begin with. If you didn't bankrupt these places to start, you wouldn't have to then figure out how to fix them, now. And the long-term solutions for these places are not going to be capital infusions anyway. It's going to be, them being able to build from the bottom up in a way that's unencumbered by, the Western corporations that are still, trying to extract what value there is.
This is something that comes up a lot on the podcast. How do you do that though? Because it doesn't work in a modern capitalist sense, because of the way that essentially the incentives are set up. This is why people feel as if things are inevitable, because to change what's happening, you would have to change the paradigm completely.
Well, I guess it depends. It's going to change anyway. It's going to change one way or the other. Either it crashes, and we get the rebuilding of society the way we did after the 1929 crash, which is where you see some of the most innovative local currencies and cooperatives and different kinds of farm structures and all got set up until they were either made illegal or forced to fold into the established mechanisms. But or it's something that doesn't happen in the industrial scaled way that we're imagining it. So people look at solutions the way we look at an app or a Facebook. It's okay, this is the solution. Now everyone's going to do this. I think it's a slow, incremental series of choices that people make to kind of wind in some sense, to wind their businesses down, or to start businesses that don't require growth in order to succeed. To come up with sustainable business plans, take less money, promise less return. Look at speaking of New Zealand, look at the companies that Inspiral is trying to start, where they're taking debt instruments instead of giving shares, or getting shares that don't go up in value, shares that only get dividends. And if you start to have investors buying shares that only have dividends, then they're going to look at the tax code and say, well, wait a minute, we're being punished by having to pay high tax on dividends and low tax on capital gains. Maybe we want to reverse that. And once you start looking at tinkering with little things like that, you get a whole different business landscape. So I don't feel like it's insurmountable. It's just currently, sort of unimaginable. But I think you go in with strategic, non-dramatic, high leverage points, like a simple one is just reversing the tax code on dividends and capital gains, so that people don't want their stock to go up. They want their stock to earn them money as it goes. And then all of a sudden, companies are no longer burdened with growth. So then they don't have to be as extractive. They don't have to be as competitive. Then they start looking at what are we providing? How much are we making on it? Stuff like that.
Actual fundamentals, essentially.
Yeah, the way business used to be. What they now call bootstrapping a business, as if it's, it's based on the Baron von Munchausen myth that he could lift himself up by his own bootstraps. Bootstrapping a business, which Wall Street tries to make sound like some weird, magical, insane, impossible thing. Bootstrapping your business just means growing your business with the revenue. So in other words, it's actually the real way business is done. You sell some stuff, you make a profit, you use that to buy more stuff, you make a profit on that, and you grow slowly based on your ability to sell stuff, not by taking in some massive amount of external investment.
But is that possible when you have to play against these aggregators? We've got a SoftBank vision fund with $100 billion that basically says, we're just going to pour money into someone else to kill you.
It is tricky, isn't it? So it's what finally brought down meetup.com. That was one of the few companies that I was an advisor of. So, meetup.com was a company that the idea was you go online, but in order to find other people that are interested in something that you are interested in, and then you go have a meeting in real space. And the insight was, that we had in the late 90s was, let's use the internet to get people offline rather than to end people online. It's a facilitator of connection. And, and Scott Hefferman, who started it, he had already done the .com thing with an advertising company. He didn't want to grow a company. He wanted to, or at least he wanted to grow a company naturally, not have investors that he has to pay back and all that. And he was doing all right, and the company was doing what it does. And then Facebook starts mumbling that, oh, we're just going to add meetup functionality to Facebook, and it's just going to wipe you off the map. I mean, so he got to the place where then he had to go sell to WeWork. And WeWork is another one of these, who knows what WeWork is. WeWork is it's like an Amazon that's using the physical reality as its vertical.
Until the real estate market crashes in the next 2 to 5 years.
We'll see, right? And now people are saying that WeWork might be too big to fail. That the banking industry might just keep them afloat even if the real estate market crashes, because they own so much, or they've got so many leases. But yeah, that'll be an interesting one to play with. But you're right. I mean, and it's a problem. I mean, I do my Team Human podcast, and the most common email I'm getting is from people who are running small businesses, trying to run them sustainably. As a woman who's got a sourdough bakery in Vermont, and she doesn't want to grow, but she's working as fast as she can with as many employees as she can manage at once. And it's interesting that the economic ecosystem, it's set up in such a way that if you're not growing, you're dying, and that's not how nature works. Things reach maturity and then they stay at that size. And it's something that our market doesn't want to allow right now. I mean, the only ways to get out of that are to achieve certain kinds of local customer loyalty, to help people understand the sort of the local multiplier effects of currency and how they move through a town, to try to enlist credit unions and educating people on why it's better to try to source things, from within their network rather than from outside it. It's hard to tell people, oh yeah, the price might be lower at Walmart, but the cost is going to be higher. Because that day when they've got this much money from their crappy job and they got to buy food and underwear, they're getting it from slave labor through Walmart is going to be an easier quicker fix than, going to Ye underwear maker in your town square.
See, but educating the consumer is never really sustainable because it's always so much extra effort that's the thing you want to try to avoid having to do if at all possible. Is this something that has to be
Yeah.
governmentally mandated? Like I could see a China trying to pull off something like this and being able to because they have that centralized government.
Well,
But
but they also, it's interesting though, they also have a certain amount of consumer education there where, they were using shame on corporations that were violating pollution regulations. And, when it is true, when you shame a company and then tell everyone in your country, don't buy from these people this week because they broke a rule. Yeah, it does. It does have more of an effect. But the trick with letting government do it right now is that the government is populated by thugs right now who don't really have long-term interest. It's like going to Tony Soprano and asking, and he's got even shorter-term concerns than normal government would. I do think we're at a place where we can't treat our citizens, we can't treat people as stupid masses anymore. That their choices do matter. That the way they organize and the way they think, either that or what you're saying is then end democracy. Let's move into some kind of a benevolent fascist state with sort of fascist climatologists and fascist economic egalitarians create a more just society. I don't know that that's how it works.
what about a randomized democracy? It would certainly be better than what we have.
I mean, just pick Joe from the phone book. You just pick a name to be president.
Just lottery system, the whole thing. It couldn't be worse than it is.
You would think not. At least you'd get some interesting people. Yeah, I mean, I wrote this piece about it on Medium. I had lunch with a bunch of people, and one of them was this former Secretary of State. And they were kind of joking with me, but they said, "Oh, Rushkoff, have you finally accepted that the experiment of democracy has been proven a failure?" And this was before Trump was elected. It was more, that in the era of reality TV and Fox News, and that our population was proving too poorly informed to exercise democracy, to intelligently vote. And in some ways, I hate to say it, in some ways they're right. If we are going to raise ourselves and our kids on a diet of inane media and not really teach critical thinking, even in school we're teaching more memorization than we are analysis. If people don't have those basic abilities, it's tricky. And that's what one of the things I wrote about in the new book in Team Human is the way education is reversed from this compensation for a work of life, a life of doing work, to an extension of work, where now we think of education as job training, and principals of schools and presidents of colleges go to corporations to ask, what skills do you need? How should we train our students to be better workers for your company? That's not what education was for. That's what training is for. That's the cost of the corporation's cost. Education was to make us thinking adults. It was so that the coal miner could go home and read a novel after his day in the mine, so that he could vote intelligently, not so that he'd be a better coal miner, but so that he'd still have dignity as a human being.
Well, he doesn't have to read anymore. The Kardashians are on TV, so we're all good. But
right, there you go, though. There you go. He doesn't need it anymore.
how do we deal with that going forward? Because I think it is incredibly difficult. I think you see a splitting of society between. You could kind of split it along the have and have not lines, but we have people that are focused on learning and improving themselves in some ways, and another group that's just falling compliant completely, becoming sheep that are stuck in a paradigm they can't escape. And devolving would really be a good word for it. It would be a mean word to use, but I think it would be accurate.
Yeah, but it's easy. I mean, and it's not. I mean, just to be clear, it's not a left-right divide that you're talking about.
It's not a left-right divide.
Right, because there are lefties who are just as, stuck in their ways and reactionary and screechy and unthinking at this point as righties, and it's troubling. I mean, that's why I'm thinking I know it sounds slow and meticulous, but people have to reorient to sort of their basic humanness, their basic sensibilities. They're afraid of each other. They don't know how to establish rapport and look in each other's eyes and have experiences. So if they're that afraid, if they're that,
I don't think they're afraid. I think they're distracted. So
right. Well, what is the state of distraction? I mean, and then you look at the professional distractors.
They're good.
And what are they doing? They're using exploits. They're using social exploits and painstakingly evolved mechanisms for social coherence and leveraging them or hacking them in order to get our attention. And that's usually by convincing us there's some kind of a threat. They are stimulating our obsessive loops and our fear loops in order to look over here. There's I don't know what this browser is doing here. There's a red, because we're connected through Hangouts. There's a little red number 9 on something up there.
Putin's coming for you. We said something we're not supposed to.
A little red number 9, yeah, but it's like some list. I was at one of those O'Reilly food camp things. It's like a gathering of technologists, and one of the guys was there who had developed the streak feature on Snapchat. And he was talking to me, "Oh, Doug, I'm feeling so bad about this now that I see the way it's being used. And now I'm going to dedicate my life to, helping people and resist these." It's like, dude, a little late now. But what they'll readily admit is that they're using, the everything they learn at B.J. Fogg's captology laboratory at Stanford and how to trigger these Pavlovian impulses to get people to pay attention and touch their little screens.
But see, I feel like it's like cybersecurity or warfare. It's much easier to play offense than it is to play defense. So the defense will always lag.
Will always lag while we're in their space. I know, and I still feel like they don't yet own reality. I mean, WeWork is trying to buy reality at this point, but they don't own the physical world. So if every time, and it's funny, I used to talk about this even when I was a much, more optimistic web enthusiast. Even in the late 90s, I used to tell people, remember when you're going online, that you're going online, that now you're not on your home turf, that all of the defense mechanisms that you've developed, all the critical filters, everything, all those things don't necessarily function in this other space. And it was easier, I think, when people had the experience of going online. You would log onto your computer, you would plug it into the modem and go on to the internet. So you did have there was this ritual that sort of separated real life from cyberspace, and now that you're walking around with the phone on and people are texting you, it feels as if that's part of your life, that's your real life. And in some ways it is. Your wife texts you, you text the wrong thing back, that's real. That's gonna change something. But you can't, you've got to I believe anyway that our physical existence, our real world existence, has to take precedence over the virtual one, because the virtual one is taking place on a landscape that is being, sounds like conspiracy theory, but I don't mean it that way. It's a landscape that is consciously designed to disempower you and to extract value from you as cash or data.
I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. I think it's just the direction of incentives. It's like gravity. It gets pulled.
Right.
It gets pulled that way because that's how the incentives are structured.
Right. That's how certain incentives are structured. But You haven't been incentivized that way. I haven't. So what's wrong with us?
I think we both have. I think if you look at people, though, I firmly believe 80-20 applies across almost everything.
Right.
And I would bet 20% of people are motivated and focused enough to overcome what the other 80% can't.
Right. The interesting thing is that the 20% of, let's say the 20% of us who see this and who don't want to be manipulated by it and who would choose to disrupt all this disruption. Right now, we're not as powerful as the other guys. I mean, just the fact that Jeff Bezos is more than happy to sell our books or serve our media demonstrates how utterly unthreatened he is by any of it.
Yeah, I feel like it's a slippery slope. It's like a book. If you're reading a good book, the chapter or the Netflix episode or whatever it is, it always ends with that cliffhanger that you can't escape. I feel like we're living in a world where it's cliffhanger after cliffhanger after cliffhanger, and they're not actually cliffhangers, but it feels like it is. So people are pulled along on something they feel like they almost physically can't escape.
Right.
How do
It
we
is
how do
weird
we
though.
change
But
that?
well, I mean, I think it's by spending more time with people in real contexts.
But you can't force it. You can't mandate it.
No, but it's sexier. It's more fun. You can make it more attractive.
But how do we?
You don't do it on the mass level. Yeah, you do it on the local level. I mean, that's part of why I'm thinking of Team Human as maybe my last book, because books are still they were the opening salvo of the industrial age. You know, the first mass item really was the Gutenberg printed book, the first mass produced thing on certainly first mass produced medium. And I'm thinking that if I'm really going to practice what I preach, I should be doing local theater, you know, really just and try to make a go of it and do the teaching. I'm teaching at a city college, which is it's both being a university professor, but also being something of a social worker when, you've got kids who are, coming from the shelter to take their class, the homeless shelter to take their class in propaganda that afternoon. So, I'm thinking it's the real world stuff. A lot of people who write to me, they're like, oh, I want to create the website that organizes people who are going to do this, or I want to create a new platform that allows the organization of blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking that's as foolish as, oh, I want to create electric cars so that we don't use as much oil. It's like, no. We should think of something other than cars. It's like, so I'm thinking that one great solution is to localize as much as possible, and to not buy into the fiction that these cheaper mass-produced things and experiences are actually more efficient in some way.
What do you think about these intellectual dark web guys? You've got Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, Eric Weinstein. I feel like you could fit in that crowd.
Really? That's interesting. But I mean, I like transgender people and stuff though, and I don't
I,
judge.
I think that crowd gets a bad rap because people listen to what the headlines say. Typically, the headlines are
Right.
inflammatory. I think if you actually got involved in what was it's more or less questioning mass market, questioning how things are currently done, because that's more or less what you want to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, I'm a questioner and all that. I'm really keen on not judging other people's experiences if I haven't walked in their shoes. And where I've gotten hung up, I mean, I tried to have a couple of dark web people on my Team Human podcast, and where I get hung up and why I ultimately don't air them is, so I'm talking with one, and then he starts talking about how he doesn't believe the statistics that young black men are arrested more than white men, or if they are, it's because they're not speaking and acting appropriately, you know. And then it's like, oh, I don't know if I can go there. Or another one was talking about how, it's an interesting idea. He was saying that the industrial age and mechanization allowed women to do the jobs that used to be men's jobs. And this has alienated them from their own biology. So now men's and women's sexual roles and gender roles and social roles are all screwed up because women are doing work that they're not biologically suited for because they have machines to do it with. And I just like, that's not a conversation I'm really prepared to have.
Yeah, that's a little weird. I do know if you look at like the most equal countries on earth, like Norway, the ones that have the best economic situation, you do actually see a bit of dichotomy in terms of the role, in terms of what people generally move to in terms of work. But I just thought it was interesting. Basically, not necessarily them, but what they're doing is they each have relatively large audiences at this point, and they're going around different parts of the world, essentially giving 5,000, 10,000 person talks and debates between each other,
Right.
just to get topics and ideas out there. It's a
No, it's
different
interesting.
local way of doing it.
It is. I just wonder how much of it, sometimes I just feel like, I don't know, what issues do we want to bring attention to now? And so I look at like another kind of dark web, say, would be the folks I'm speaking with who think that the Russiagate is overblown, that the left is making a huge tactical error by focusing all of its wrath on, or too much of its wrath, on the idea that Russia intervention took the election away, and where that's not, where Russia really isn't the boogeyman here, even if they're bad, that they're a relatively small economy, a nearly bankrupt country. And sure, they've been sending out Twitter to the world like everyone does, doing whatever propaganda they can. But that, that all of our focus on that is distracting us from much bigger and realer problems. And that, Mueller, whoever, is not going to come through like the cavalry with some smoking gun that makes the Trump phenomenon go away. That it's not Russia. It's something else is happening here.
But those aren't mutually exclusive. So I would say if you look at the left, they are focusing way too much on this, because you can't just get angry about someone else and have that be your platform. It's not a platform. You've got to have something. You've got to actually stand for something. Otherwise,
Right.
you fall for everything. It's the old quote. But at the same time, it is a major problem what's happening there. But I think, yeah, if you don't address the underlying problems, which are clearly happening, then you have a larger problem that it boils over. It's kind of like stirring the soup, but forgetting to turn off the heat.
Right. But I guess what I'm saying is that you can end up in these, could do these talks around the country about, certain kinds of issues. But I feel like we're in an all hands on deck moment now. And I don't know that the social justice frame of the gender departments at East Coast universities.
Oh yeah, it's all bullshit. It doesn't matter.
Right. Who cares? Let them teach what they're going to teach or study what they're going to. Don't go into that. Do something else. I mean, I took a feminism course back in the ancient days when I was in college in 1980. I took the Intro to Women's Studies, or I was the only guy in the class, which was cool in itself. And it was in their new building. They had a new women's studies building. But they taught me, this isn't taught anymore. They taught me that gender wasn't real. That this was this moment, there was a kind of feminism. And it was a period that gender is a social construction, and that a baby is not a boy or a girl until the doctor says it's a boy. Before then, it's just a baby with a pipish, or a baby with a whatever the Yiddish is for what my grandmother called Virginia. That and that gender then is the social construction that happens after. So then I'm thinking that, that's my little 19-year-old, whatever I was. And then I found out that, well, that's not true. It was a branch. But, it's like, I survived, whether what I was taught was right or wrong. So I guess the thing I'm just concerned about is there's so much attention now going to it's what used to happen on the Well or on Usenet. There'd be a discussion. This is back in the early days of the net when we had a text-only internet. There'd be a discussion, and then the discussion would go meta. And it would be about the terms of the discussion, or who's allowed to argue this way, and the way you're arguing is wrong. And once it got there, it was like, kind of who cares? And then you get into what was called Godwin's Law, and then someone calls someone else a Nazi. And then
and that's when the professors get involved, because suddenly it becomes interesting for them.
Yeah, I guess, and then it's over. And so there's so much argument now about the terms of the argument, or whose speech is being repressed, and, who's gotten deplatformed by friggin' YouTube or something. I don't know. It's
people are whining about the details. What are the big problems that you see?
Big problems is we're ending lots of species. We're a lot of species. We're just killing them. I guess it's a controversial belief now. I believe that climate change is real and represents a genuine threat to many populations and potentially everybody, because of the way that I don't think we realized industrialization would go this fast. I mean, in our lifetime, when you think about all the shipping containers and mining companies, and the expansion really got mechanized in a way that was unimaginable in the 40s or 50s. It happened. And I think we've got to look at the way that we feed and house and energize ourselves, on the most basic level, in order to keep our species and as many others, going, and to keep the climate that we're in within a range that's suitable for our civilization.
And the fact that for some people that's remotely debatable question is in and of itself a big problem.
Yeah. I mean, as I see it.
I think as everyone at least should see it. And if you don't see it as that, just look into the science a little bit more, guys, and make sure that you're reading a credible website, because if you are, the science is very straightforward.
Right. At the same time, though, then it's tricky. So then you look at something like vaccine science. Right. And I know rationally that vaccines are good for the herd. They really are. We'd have smallpox or something were it not for vaccines. At the same time, I've worked with medical professionals who have been treating people who had vaccine issues. And I know they're super rare, but they're real enough that there's funds to help care for these people, and the syndromes they get are real. The various autoimmune diseases that are associated with certain combinations of vaccines done on certain people at certain times in their lives. And the refusal, I guess, to entertain some of this doesn't assuage those who are concerned. It just magnifies their questioning, and that kind of treatment, I think, then is part of what they feel justifies their questioning of anything scientific.
And that's a very dangerous place to be.
It's a really dangerous place to be.
So this is a bit of a transition, but throwing rocks at the Google bus. What happened here in terms of what happened, and then in terms of why you decided to write a book about it?
Well, in real life, what happened was, Google, who were the two Stanford kids who came up with an algorithm in their dorm room to take down Yahoo and the evil top-down corporatization of the web, ended up turning into the biggest corporate behemoth the web had ever seen. And where they operated was becoming unlivable for the people who lived there. So they were paying, great in a certain way. They were paying the developers who came out there to work for them. They were paying them great money, and all the rents went up in San Francisco and around there. And the people who had lived there for 50 or 100 years couldn't afford to live there anymore. So San Francisco ended up serving as a kind of a backdrop, or like a Disneyfied backdrop for Google employees to feel like they were living somewhere cool, but everyone who actually lived there had to leave. And Google then started using, and they meant well, they started to use these buses to transport their workers from San Francisco down to the mothership in Mountain View or wherever they are. And they were using public bus stops to bring them there. And they became this real symbol of this kind of foreign invasion. So people started to protest at the bus stops, protesting against the gentrification, because it turned out that if you lived within walking distance of a bus stop, your rent was even 30% higher than it was outside those areas. So it was really, it was upsetting, this kind of hyper gentrification of the neighborhood. And then in Oakland, someone actually threw a rock at one of the Google buses and broke their window. And I was getting all these texts that morning saying, "Yay, look what happened. Doug, aren't you happy about this?" And I'm like, "I'm not happy about people throwing a rock. I know people on that bus, and they're just programmers trying to make enough money before they get burned out by Google to live their lives." So it's whose fault is it? In the end, and that was why I wanted to then write this book. How did this happen? Is it the CEO's fault? Well, the CEO is just answering to the shareholders who want their shares to grow. Is it the shareholders' fault? Well, the shareholders are some of us who have a 401k plan or something at work where we want our S&P fund to go up so that we can retire. So, we're all part of this destructive cycle. And I wrote the book to really look at where did this come from? And what can we do instead? How can we move from a growth-based extractive economy that really, kicks into a new gear when it's being driven by digital companies and digital stock, rather than the old sort of, oil companies that had a slower extraction rate. And, so what do we do, and how do we flip it? So, it's a book where I really go all the way back to the earliest corporations and show really how our currency system is like an operating system, and corporations are like the software running on that system. And then how could we change the operating system to be more friendly to real people and places? Get back to that sort of Adam Smith style economics, where you favor, local economics over foreign, and small business over large, in order to empower real people and places. He was the one who argued that you've got to have, 3 factors of production: land, labor, and capital. And right now in the digital economy, capital is the only one with a seat at the table. It's the venture capitalists who say what happens. The land, the place where we do stuff, that's destroyed. The labor has no voice either. That's why I was really happy when 10,000 Google workers walked out, based on the companies. They were going to make a version of the browser, I think, that would work in China, and censor all the stuff that China wanted censored. And people who were working at the company said, "No, we don't want to be making that." And just for once, for labor to realize, oh, we're actually the ones creating the value here. It's an important shift.
What do you think about Eric Ries's push for a long-term stock exchange? Something that instead of trading every freaking microsecond, traded it every quarter or had a longer-term horizon.
It's a good start. I mean, a long-term stock exchange, it really, the algorithms don't have much to do on that. It kind of kills the whole high frequency
But
insanity.
it allows you to think longer term as well.
Right. I mean, a quarter is not really long term. A year,
but you could set the terms as you wanted.
Yeah. I mean, it's better. I mean, it's why I think Unilever decided they're not going to give quarterly reports anymore because they didn't want to be beholden to that. And it was great. The CEO, he did some interview. I forgot, some awful, Wall Street Journal kind of place interviewed him, and they said, "Well, aren't you going to lose shareholders when you stop doing quarterly reports?" He said, "Yeah, we'll lose some shareholders, but we'll get other ones." And I think that's a good, I think that these kinds of structural changes to markets are more promising than most of what's out there. There's these, if you want to be a socially conscious investor, they have these mutual funds you can buy that are kind of like filtered. So you buy a mutual fund, but gun manufacturers and cigarette smoking places, those are filtered out. But you're still just buying into the same old problem. Just because the company's making toys instead of guns doesn't mean it's not part of the extractive economy. So I do like a long-term stock exchange as at least the first of what are hopefully many structural modifications or alternatives for people. I still don't know if stock. I'm into employee ownership and platform cooperatives, and what would Uber have been like if it was owned by the drivers instead of these shareholders, and or looking at how do you teach, and a lot of them understand now, how do you teach young developers not to go for a high valuation but to go for a low valuation so they don't have to pay back as much money. It's retraining the way they think. But once you can sort of show them the math and the outcome, a lot of them go, "Oh, I get it. I want a low valuation." It's just, they're babies. They're college dropouts who program some cool thing, and then some guy, from Sequoia Capital wearing a fancy cashmere sweater just tells them this is how it's going to be, and that's what kills many a company.
Blockchain.
I mean, I wish the problem were just as easy as having a better ledger. I don't look at the problem. I don't think the problem is that we're not accounting for enough. I'm if anything, I'm pushing the other way, not anti-blockchain, but to get more things off the books, not on the books. There's this, I felt like there's almost a techno-utopian vision that once we're able to compensate Joe for his decision to get out on the left side of the bed rather than the right side of the bed, because that data is of value to the Certa company when they're developing a mattress to see, it's like, dude, you can't, just stop already. So I don't know. I just feel like there's this, and I get it. There's this.
It's utopianism. People think there's a solution.
There is, and that somehow more data is going to do that. I mean, yeah, if I would rather live in a world where we trust our banks to not to fix the books than one where I need a blockchain in order to have trust, or I'd rather have trust in the people I'm exchanging with. I'm so sure. I mean, blockchain, in terms of if it's going to end up being a more efficient way to do an Excel spreadsheet and to have all these contracts work and to do rights management, I mean, that'd be great. That'd be great. If I want to, put a picture on my website and I can't even figure out who to pay or what to do, and I could just drop it in a search engine, and it's got this blockchain, and they say, here, you give 0.03 Ethereum to Taylor Swift, and you can use this picture of her hand. Okay, great, done. That's fine. So we are having real problems with the rights management of digital assets. There's our cases for it, or the tracking of soybeans to make sure they're organic or whatever it is. Sure, gig is int, as Grandma would say. Go in good health, but is it? Do I see it as a solution for our economic inequality woes? No.
What about forced ownership by employees? So we had a set percentage of a company that had to be owned by employees, just governmentally mandated. If you want to have a US corporation, if you want to have a Singapore corporation, whatever country, then 25%, 10%, et cetera, has to be owned by the employees.
Well, if you do a few trials and see what that does, the problem with doing things with rules is people figure out how to game them so friggin' fast. I was just talking to my cousin, who's actually a Trump supporter guy out in Virginia. And he said, look, the government did this thing, government of Virginia, where they gave kickbacks and subsidies to anybody who provided renewable resources as opposed to extractive ones. And they classified lumber as a renewable resource. So this guy clear cut all these forests with bulldozers, just wrecked them all to get the subsidy money from the government. And I was like, oh, that wasn't really wasn't the intention of this.
It's like GDPR.
Yeah, you just kind of, right. It makes these mistakes. So yeah, I love employee ownership, but I'd rather people just start employee-owned companies.
I think one of the big problems you have, and one of the differences I see when I talk to liberals and conservatives, is how they view specific versus general examples. So in my experience, if my experience, Republicans, conservatives are much more focused on a specific thing. This guy took advantage of this healthcare thing. This guy took advantage of whatever it was. Whereas if
I was on the kibbutz and these people, they didn't work. So I left the kibbutz and now I'm a Republican. Right.
Exactly. versus looking at a larger scale picture and ignoring the smaller details, which is typically what happens more on the left, on a liberal side of things. I don't know if you agree, or if there's a way around that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of do, but I feel like, you can marry those two sensibilities by bringing, higher values to, real world micro interactions. If you're, and that's why I was, it's funny. I had some meetings right after Trump was elected. That's when the left finally was willing to hear from me. I mean, I'm trying to get meetings with Bernie's people, Hillary's people, all of them, all along, to help them with economic policy. Finally, after all that, they're willing to talk to me. And what I was telling them was, look, what we've got to do is initiate programs for mutual aid in Rust Belt communities and all these places where we think it's those white enemy, unemployed, whatever. Show them that all you need for an economy is people with skills and people with needs. You put them together, you create a way for them to credit and debit, and all of a sudden you get mutual aid. This is not rocket science. And all they wanted was, no, let's just find ways to make Trump look bad to them. And what I was trying to do is sort of what you're suggesting is that, or what you're suggesting to me anyway, is people, particularly people who don't trust this higher value system of the progressives or of the left, you meet them where they live in real ways that show real differences. Don't tell them what it is. Don't say this is labor, this is leftism, this is progressive thought, this is, the distributist economy. Just help people And then it gets into their blood what it is, they're going to be naturally attracted to candidates who are promoting and supporting that kind of activity. Community supported agriculture doesn't have to be lefty.
And Hillary certainly never baked cookies and brought it to anybody. I know you're a super busy guy. You've got a lot going on, Douglas. I have a couple last questions.
All right, yeah, because I got to do a person.
Okay, that sounds really awkward when you say it that way.
If only.
Two last questions. First one, what's your big challenge for yourself in 2019 and for the next 10 years?
Well, it sounds awful, but I think the big challenge for me is in some ways to get off the global media stage. I've written 20 books and written hundreds of articles. I've said a lot. And what I'm trying to do is use the audience that I've been able to manage to capture, is that the word for it? The platform that I have to give voice to other people. That's why I'm doing a podcast and having other people on there and celebrating what they're doing and trying to get them attention for what they're doing. I want to pass on the best of what I've figured out to people who can take it to the next stage. I mean, I'm not saying I'm ready to just retire and die. I don't mean that, but I feel like I haven't lived enough of my own life. I've spent so much of it writing or so much of it doing one internet-y thing or a media thing or another, and running from thing to thing to thing. So I want to embed myself more in the local community where I live. And I want to continue to write, but I want to write from there, from those experiences, kind of from the bottom up, rather than this sort of top-down intellectual place. And I really see this Team Human manifesto as kind of a capstone to all the work I've been doing and saying, okay, so here's how we deal with science. Here's how we deal with spirituality. Here's how we deal with money. All from this new sort of reified human perspective. And so that's going to be the challenge for me, and learning how to say no. Just because some other show wants me on, or to go, okay, just because they want you on doesn't mean you have something worth saying. It's just they need someone on their show.
That's a humble perspective. I think that's super important as well. And then one last thing, a quote, a call to action, or something for listeners you'd want them to take away before you tell them more about you and where to find you.
I mean, I guess, my main call to action is find the others, and that means start by finding the others who are looking for humans. There's a lot of us out there who are, if you walk around in the streets of New York, everybody's looking in their phones, but every once in a while you make eye contact with someone who isn't. And it's like this weird secret club of people who are staying conscious while everybody else is going in the machine. It feels like it used to when you'd go to a rave party or something, and then the next day you'd be in the bank, and like the bank teller is like this girl who was at the rave that night, and you're like, look at you, and I remember you, and you have this moment of like, oh, we're in the conspiracy, and now we're in drag of being regular people. There's that. So find the others, and then really find the others. Find the human being in those who seem the most different, most unlike you. Get past the fact that they like the wrong presidential candidate, or that they think they believe weird stuff, and find the human impulse, the human fears that are fueling their distortions, and you be there with them, be there with that and listen, because there's an underlying logic, or certainly an emotional logic, to what everybody's going through. And if we continue to see people as deplorables, then we're the bad guys.
And then we're screwed. Your podcast is Team Human. Our tagline is a podcast about the future of all of us. And we talked about doomsday at the beginning of this. We've got a little bit more control than some people like to give us credit. Where's the best place for people to find you, Douglas? I know you got to run.
I guess rushkoff.com, and check out Team Human. It's a book. It comes out January 22nd of 2019. And find it, steal it, whatever you want. But read it. It's short and fun and hopefully inspiring and galvanizing.
20 books. The man, the machine, Douglas Rushkoff. Thanks for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
This has been fun. Cheers, guys. Awesome.